To a man we've admired for many, many years, Todd Rundgren.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you down in the country.
It's been a long time coming, but finally we got here, and we're making the most of it. We've got 4 dates across the country, so that's a pretty good start from what I understand.
Yeah.
4
Well,
cities.
this is definitely my first time interviewing you, so I don't know how I'm going to cram in 43 years of history into the next 20 minutes, but we will attempt to do so. Maybe we should skip over Woody's truck stop then and get to...
Okay, let's just go right directly. Although that's completely germane to the fact that I'm playing blues music on this tour, because that was my first gig in a blues band. That's what Woody's Truck Stop was. But,
Yeah, and doing a bit of Robert Johnson.
Yeah. A peculiar circumstance. When I finished my last studio album, we needed to find a distributor, and the entity that stepped up also happened to be administering Robert Johnson's publishing catalog. But they had no master recordings. They had no versions that they could license for films or TV or anything like that. So it became a kind of a twofer deal. They put out my album, but they required that I also do a record of Robert Johnson covers, which has its challenges, but since my first gig was as a blues guitar player, I figured I would scull out some way to do it.
Interesting deal. Thank God you didn't do the deal with the publisher of the Spice Girls catalogue.
Oh, well,
That'd be a fun tour down here at the moment, wouldn't
exactly.
it? Yeah.
I haven't worn drag in years.
Yeah. So the career sort of went from, if we start off with Woody's Truck Stop, into Naz came next.
Yeah.
And then very quickly we were into the short-lived Runt.
Well, there was a gap in there because after I left the Naz, I made something of a career change. I wanted to become a record producer and engineer and continue to be involved in music from that standpoint, but I didn't want to be in a band. The politics of having a band and the grueling aspects of the road and things like that didn't much appeal to me after my 18 months or so with the Naz. And at first I just went into the studio and started making records for people. And then I put out an album of my own just as a way to kind of document my musical ideas, and accidentally had a hit record off of it, and so I was suddenly back performing again.
Well, something, anything, I guess you're talking about here. And, a double album at a time when, double albums were fairly rare back in those days. I guess that, like if you look at the average CD now, every CD probably is the equivalent of what we had
Would
back
have to
then.
be, as long as a double album.
Yeah.
I didn't set out to make a double album. It's just when I started recording the songs, I got into a sort of a, I hate to say formulaic, but in musical terms, that's what it turned out to be, approach to writing songs. And so what was supposed to be maybe a lengthy single album just soon turned into an album and a half. And then I got the idea to do a live side as a contrast to the 3 sides where I played all the instruments myself. And bada bing, you got a double album.
Yeah, and from that era we had the hits "Hello, It's Me" and "I Saw the Light." How do they sit with you these days? I mean, do you look back and look at them as some of your best work?
Well, I Saw the Light, for all of its charms, was a song I wrote in about 20 minutes. So,
as tends to be the case with a lot of hits.
And in some ways, it's hard to reach that kind of essential simplicity that makes a record appeal to a broader audience. And maybe the fact that I wasn't thinking about it that much was the key to it. But something, anything in general was an exercise in songwriting for me, in varying styles. And by the time I got to the end of it, I was ready to make a more or less radical change and start looking at music in a different way. So unfortunately for the record label and anyone who thought that I was going to follow up something, anything with similar sorts of accessible songcraft, were somewhat disappointed by the follow-up, A Wizard of True Star.
which was an album that you've recently taken on the road and performed in its
Yeah,
entirety.
about a year ago, we did a live theatricalization of the record in about, I don't know, less than 20 shows we did. We did initially about 10 shows in the Midwest United States, and then another 4, I think, in California, and then we did 2 in Europe. It's one of these sort of limited run things because it involves a lot more production than I usually take out. A lot more people, larger crew, props, costumes, and things like that. And normally, because of the economics of touring in this day and age, you try and keep things pretty stripped down. So I only do them in limited runs, those sort of album tributes. We did actually did 2 albums just this last month, early September, which were Todd and Healing.
All right.
And took a slightly different approach, but the end result is the same. We play in larger places. We upped the ante on the production quite a bit.
And that was never done in the 70s with those albums? This was the first time
did songs from them and never tried to reproduce the albums literally. There were always things on those records that were either too much of a challenge to move from the studio to the live context because we didn't have the same kind of technology we have now. Now we got samplers and laptop computers to use for playback and synthesizers that don't require warming up for a half an hour before they stay in tune, that sort of thing. Everything's gotten a lot easier to reproduce in some ways. So we never made that attempt in the 70s. And also in the 70s, I was coming out with a record either of my own or with Utopia probably every 6 or 8 months. And so to stop and dwell on one record just didn't seem practical. We were just barreling through all of this new music. And every time we would go out on the road, every 6 or 8 months, to be a brand new show.
So what will you do with these complete concert albums? Will they be released for DVD?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the Wizard album has taken more than a year to kind of pull together because while we videotaped 5 shows, none of them actually were, the perfect show. There were so many technical things involved. I went through about a dozen costume changes in an hour, and there were sometimes issues with that. There'd be playing issues, other sorts of elements of the production. So in the end, I decided that I would edit together the 5 shows and then come up with a best of, so people could get kind of a more raw version of any particular show that they might have attended, and then there would be kind of the ideal show, which would be excerpted from all 5 shows. So that's taken a lot of time. The show that we did recently with Todd and Healing, that'll probably come out before Wizard comes out, if only because the production was easier to capture. The music was easier in some ways to play because it resembles more song structures than A Wizard, a True Star. And also, we've just kind of, I had other things that I had to do after Wizard last year and couldn't even get to the editing for like 4 to 6 months, to even start breaking everything down. Here we've got everything moving at a much faster pace, and ideally that'll be out probably in the spring.
Yeah, but you've done some interesting things over the last 5 years in particular, and one particularly that comes to mind is the new Cars, when you sat in as the lead singer of the Cars there for a while.
That was an interesting experiment, but in the end it was ill-fated. Getting the thing together was like pulling teeth because there were so many entities involved. There was Rick Ocasek, who didn't want to go out on the road, didn't want to reform the band, but didn't necessarily want to stop the band from reforming, just in case maybe it succeeded and he decided he wanted to step in at some later date, perhaps. And then there was the issue of Ben Orr's estate because he died several years ago, but his estate was still part of the original Cars Corporation, I guess. So it took us a long time to get it on the road, and we finally had to call it the New Cars, couldn't call it the Cars. That was something of a problem because the promoters didn't know how to approach that. You know, we said, how close to the old cars is it? Is it brand new cars, or is it just a new paint job on the old car? That sort of thing. But the thing that really sort of killed it is after we had done, you know, our months of promotion and did our live recording actually before we ever played any live gigs, and finally got out on the road. About 3 weeks in, there was an accident on the bus. Bus swerved to miss a car that cut in front of it, and Elliot, our guitar player, was standing up in the front lounge and got thrown against the bulkhead and broke his collarbone. So we had to, you know, he had to go get surgery for it, and it was the end of the tour, a tour that was supposed to last probably at least 3 months and maybe go around the world, just essentially ended after 3 weeks. And we had spent all of our promotional money and taken our merchandising advances and stuff. So every gig that we did after that, you know, after he healed up and we went back out on the road, we wouldn't make any money. We were just making money for Rick Ocasek, you know, and the estate of Benor, and for the T-shirt company, and for the agency, and for everyone else. But we were just paying off debt the whole time. That kind of sunk the whole thing.
Yeah. Did you go as far as considering an album?
We did an album. But
like a studio album, I mean, of new
songs?
songs?
We never got as far as considering that, no. If we had had success on the road, then it would have been something to consider. But because of all of our problems keeping the band on the road, we just never got to that point.
Now, with all of this going on musically and what you're doing on stage, you've got the parallel career of being the record producer as well. You know, how do you divide the two up? Are you more performer or producer?
Well, I'm much more of a performer now because the production business has kind of shrunk along with the industry in general. Part of it is the fact that acts that are signed to record labels, the recording budgets aren't what they used to be. The labels are not as profligate. And so sometimes it's not worth it from a producer standpoint to be involved. The other issue is that now anyone with any sort of enterprise as a musician can build their own studio. They can go get a laptop and some software and a few microphones, and everything is way cheaper than it used to be. And that was part of what I used to offer to clients, was that I had my own studio, and that helped us control the expenses and things like that. Now that's not a unique thing. Anyone can pretty much record in their bedroom.
But I guess the big one was Meat Loaf, Bat Out of Hell.
Yeah, and that was still back in the, you know, the heyday. That was back in the 70s when I was producing, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 records a year, as well as doing my own records. So
it was such an innovative record, wasn't it? Very creative and very different to anything else that was happening at the time.
Well, it was somewhat different, but I actually always saw it as a spoof on Bruce Springsteen. You know, Bruce Springsteen doesn't do those overblown songs like he used to, but his first couple records, they were all the, you know, like 7-minute epics and things like that. And when Meat Loaf first auditioned to do the record, the first thing that popped into my head was, this is a spoof on Bruce Springsteen. It's the same kind of material when it's all this kind of almost 50s rebel without a cause, iconography, motorcycles, switchblades, you know, cars, making out in a car, and all this other, essentially, you know, cliches from the 50s. But like given this whole other, given this grand treatment in a way. And I thought that that's what the world needed, was something to kind of take the piss out of Bruce Springsteen, who was on the cover of Time magazine and things like that. He was the biggest thing happening, and I thought, here's an opportunity to do something fun as well as musical. And that's the approach I took. I'm sure Meat Loaf didn't hear it that way, but that, I think, was part of the key to this success, and also the reason why I was able to hear something in in the songs and the music that every other producer that they went to never heard. Every other producer probably looked at it on its merits and said, well, first of all, the songs are too long. We got no singles. Second of all, he's a big fat guy, you know, and the girls aren't going to like him. And so they can't sell him on the basis of that. He's not Bruce Springsteen, obviously. But all of those things in the end turned out to be the, you know, what made it unique and different, and also what, once Meat Loaf got exposed, especially through like MTV, he was one of the early MTV artists. One of the things that made people want to come see him live, you know, was to see this Pavarotti kind of guy sweltering all over the stage and stuff, you know, with a little girl had, you know, a fraction of his size on his leg, you know. It was, it was something of a spectacle.
Yeah. You said when you auditioned Meat Loaf, so was it your job as producer to find the singer and the singer became Meat Loaf?
No, Meat Loaf and Steinman were already an item, I guess you would call it. Jim Steinman had been writing music for the Public Theater in New York, which is the New York Shakespeare Festival, and looking for success essentially on Broadway, you know, writing musicals, and that's why the songs kind of have the character that they do. They have this sort of grandiose, very performance-oriented aspect to them, and they also often have a storyline that goes with them. And he had been looking for someone to kind of, to Svengali, you know, to kind of like give this material to, someone who could give it the proper kind of overblown treatment that he was looking for. And so when I first saw them perform the material, I knew who Meat Loaf was. I saw him in the Rocky Horror Show on Broadway. But when he finally appeared before me, they had the whole act kind of all already worked out. Steinman played the piano, had two background singers, and they did everything almost just like it appeared on the record, except it didn't have any of the instrumentation. He's running around the room with this handkerchief, you know, screaming his guts out. You know, we didn't even need a microphone, you know. And I tend sometimes to gravitate towards these unusual projects that I think deserve to be on record, but I'm never sure have any real commercial value. So sometimes I look at them as like a field recordist for the Library of Congress. You know, I'm just capturing something for posterity, unsure or sometimes fairly sure that it won't have any commercial success. And there are several acts, I guess, through my career. The band that turned out to be Sparks was originally called Half Nelson. And I did their first album, and I did it just because they were making some of the weirdest music I ever heard. And they didn't really have any hit singles off of that album.
What about Dragon, your Australian connection?
Well, that was kind of out of the blue, because I really was not much familiar with Australian music. But I think it was sometime, it was not in the midst of, it probably came a little bit after what we call the Australian invasion, you know, which included like Men at Work and In Excess, and also Split Ends and eventually Crowded House.
Probably around the same time as Ice
sometime
House.
Around that, you know,
Ice
and I
House
think that they were
sense,
thinking that they could probably get some attention in the United States on that basis. So I had to, you know, sort of bone up on their history a bit before that. But they had some really great players in the band. For instance, Tommy Emmanuel is one of my favorite guitar players, and I hadn't heard him before that particular project. And he kind of floored me with his range and finesse and stuff. And the first time I came to Australia, I got to see him do a solo show. And that was pretty impressive as well. But they kind of went through, and it didn't succeed in the U.S. It did succeed, I think, back in Australia.
Big hit here, yeah.
Became a hit here again for them. So that was good. You know, I think their probably initial objective of getting some traction in the U.S. They were a little disappointed in that, but otherwise, yeah, it turned out to be a good record.
How do you see Can We Still Be Friends in the body of your work?
Just the song, well, it's more than just a song, because it's a song that seems to have a lot of appeal to other artists. It's maybe my most covered song.
Yeah. Do you have a
Robert
favorite
Palmer
cover?
and Rod Stewart and Alison Krauss, and just like I can't name all the artists who've taken a stab at it, and there's something gratifying in that other artists like a song enough that they feel they want to take a crack at interpreting it, because I know I feel that way about a lot of other artists' songs, whether I do or don't take a crack at them. So, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm a musical shark in a way. I can't do the same thing over and over again. It becomes joyless for me in a way. If I were to go out and play the same set night after night for 3 months, I would probably not want to ever do that again, regardless of how remunerative it is, because I'm selfish in some ways about music. I need to entertain myself. I need to have enjoyment about it, and I kind of dread the phenomenon where you've been in the music for so long that you essentially resign yourself to being more of a performer of your songs rather than a musician. In other words, you're a jukebox for people, and you could go to Las Vegas and work for months if you've got enough hits. Of course, I don't, but if you had that long string of hits, you could put something together where you just play the hits night after night after night after night, and it makes me die inside, to think I'm not making new music, that I'm only rehashing old music. So it's just part of the way my musical life evolved. The production is what enabled me to support myself. And so when it came to making records, I never had to have that self-conscious hit mania thing, where you have to have hits or else you don't survive. I only had to have someone willing to put the records out, but I didn't have to have the hits. And my relationship with Bearsville often afforded me that, because I was producing a lot of Bearsville artists, or artists for Albert Grossman, and Bearsville was his label. So it was kind of a thing where I guess they owed me the courtesy of putting my records out, regardless of how weird they were.
This weekend on Saturday marks what would have been the 70th birthday of John Lennon, and I guess your fans know about the obsession that Mark David Chapman had with you, as well as with John. What sort of feelings went through your mind when you found out about Mark Chapman and his love of Todd Rundgren?
Well, there's a number of aspects to this. One is the danger of celebrity, and watch out what you wish for. I've never actually wanted celebrity, and I don't know whether John Lennon wanted the celebrity that he had by the time the fatal event happened, but by then it just it was a moot question. John Lennon is a worldwide recognizable celebrity, and I'm not, and therefore your profile makes you a bigger target, because there are wacky people out there who get ideas and obsessions in their head that maybe have no basis in reality, but in the end they're going to focus them on you. And I don't know that I was in any danger from him, but I know that, like most artists, you've encountered crazy fans, some of which you may have suspected had the potential for violence. You experience the threat of violence. I've had assassination threats and things like that. Like somebody will call up somebody before a show and say, if Todd Rundgren appears on stage, I'm going to shoot him. but you don't, and you can't take that seriously. Half the time it's, some kind of crank call or something like that. I recall a bomb threat at a gig we had in a college, and it turned out to be a bunch of frat people who were pissed off that nobody was showing up at their party. So they were trying to shut the gig down so that people would come to their kegger. And, but people take the threat seriously at the time. It's just something that is, I think, again, a product of the cult of celebrity. And since I've never been committed to that, I think, perhaps that keeps me enough out of the limelight that I don't think about that too much.
I'll ask you one final question about 30 Rock. Did you see the episode where you were name checked?
Yes, I did see the episode, and I know why that episode appeared. I had actually met Tina Fey when she was still working on Saturday Night Live, and discovered that she and I went to the same high school together. We didn't go at the same time. She went like 15 years after I did, or something like that. But I think that's one of those things where famous people from your school seem to be a special class of something. We had Jim Croce, who also went to our high school, and another member of the cast of SNL also went to the high school. So I think it becomes one of these things where you constantly hear about the other people in your school who went to your school who became famous. So probably all through when she was going to high school, every once in a while it would come up, oh, did you know Todd Rundgren went to this school?
Yeah.
And barely graduated. And so I think that's probably, it wasn't completely out of the blue. It was a thing that was probably a germ of it came from our common background.
Yeah. Well, there's only one thing left now. That's to have Todd Rundgren become a Simpsons character.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, the name check that really freaked me out was when I was watching Beavis and Butthead one night, and I got name checked there. And that's like Beavis said, "That chick looks like Todd Rundgren." and Butthead says, "Who?" "Todd Rundgren." "Who?" "Don't you know who Todd Rundgren is?" "No." And that was it. But when it comes out of the blue, you're watching a television, you think you're hallucinating, that you suddenly became, part of the dialogue in a cartoon show.
Yeah.
Pretty weird, yeah.
Well, it's been great to hear the Todd Rundgren story. Todd, thank you for joining us here at Undercover.
My pleasure.